So we're going to get started with some questions and look to have some conversation. We will go to Q&A within the audience at a little later in the program. If I can ask, when you do want to ask a question, if you can raise your hand, and as the microphone comes to you, can you just state your name and which company you're from? Please keep your questions brief. We're not looking for long statements, just a quick question for the panel. So I do want to pick up from Dr. Day's excellent presentation, and thanks so much, Charlie, for doing that at short notice today, and you did a tremendous job. Within that presentation, you really did highlight for us a framework that's under development for how moonshots might be carried forward in Australia. And that's really exciting to see that we're putting that forward. And that came out of a lot of the work that you'd done with your team around the Prosperity Through Innovation report. Actually, I want to pose the question to other members on the panel, just what they thought might have resonated most within Dr. Day's presentation for them. There are a number of criteria to consider, a number of angles to take. I'm just wondering what might have actually been something you think your business is picking up on at the moment and taking forward. I might start with Michael, if I may. What were your thoughts there, Michael?
Just thank you again, Charlie, for stepping in. Probably the number one thing that resonated with me was the first point around the moonshots about needing to be focused. There's got to be some vision or purpose or meaning, a broader problem to be solved. And I think that I think that was just as relevant for any organisation that if you're thinking about how do you get that next level of innovation, or you're looking for that moonshot, it has to be relatable to something. There has to be a job to be done or a problem to be solved. That was the thing that I thought, and interesting, that was the first one you went to. It has to be focused on something.
And that's often the hardest thing to do.
Fantastic, thank you. Christian, your views? Maybe you've got some ideas as to how that rationale might be utilised in areas that you're undertaking at Telstra.
Yeah, so first I'm actually new to Australia, arrived here in November, and I'm positively shocked and surprised that you think about moonshots. I'm actually proud of you, and I think you all deserve an applause for that. So furthermore, if you actually think about moonshots, an important element is actually software. What is actually happening out there is the compute power grows exponentially, and that's the true driver for all these moonshots. It's about software. So I believe you should actually have a moonshot around software as part of all of your moonshots. And do you want to hear a suggestion what it could be? Somebody need to say yes. You need to say yes. See, after lunch we need some energy in the room. Yes. Okay. So what could it be? If you actually talk to teenage kids and ask them how the future is going to look like, that gives you quite some insights. And what they're actually saying, the 10 to 16-year-olds, they're actually saying these cell phones here go away, believe it or not. They go away and actually get replaced by little glasses. And we will all put these glasses on, and then instead of looking at little apps here, you'll see three-dimensionally floating objects here above all of us. And then, so there will be like digital twins, the brothers and sisters of every physical object. And when you sit in your car at night and you drive to a traffic light, then the digital twin of the car will talk to the digital twin of the traffic light and say, hey buddy, wake up, it's time that it gets green. So I think for this, you need a data exchange, how all these things do talk to each other. And that could be an Australian project, and it's so necessary. Why? More devices coming on, exponentially growing security risks, and there needs to be a safe way for Australians and all of their equipment, toys, cars to safely exchange data. I think that would be a fun project to do, and something which you could take on. It would be truly Australian, and then you can export it to the world.
Christian, thank you for bringing some divergent thinking to Australia. Fantastic, we love it.
Actually, to make it touchable, I actually brought the prototype of these glasses for you, which I'm going to send around. Yeah, is that fine? Can I send it around for entertainment? Yes.
Certainly. While he's doing that, I might just ask Valeska what it means from a lawyer's perspective to have that sort of divergent thinking. We do have a couple of regulations in Australia to consider. What is Alan's doing to have a platform that frees us up from some of the regulation to be able to make room for a moonshot?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key issues, or one of the things that often holds us back from these things, is the fear of what the consequences could be. Because we're talking about moonshots, we're talking about the unknown, and everyone sort of finds talking about governance reasonably tedious. But I actually think it can be really liberating if you have an adequate governance framework. If we're talking, whether we're talking about sort of AI governance or data governance, it sets out the parameters. You obviously have to have that strategic vision first, but it helps you not only comply, which actually in some ways should be the lesser part of the focus of that, but actually helps you to optimise the value in whatever you're doing, and test use cases and make decisions in a way that's going to give some comfort to the organisation or the country about what you're doing. And there are a number of different ways to set that up, obviously, and it can change over time, and it needs to be sufficiently flexible so that it's not sort of hampering innovation. But thinking about setting up those frameworks from the outset, rather than just dealing with things on an ad hoc basis, can actually give that freedom, I think, to then further encourage and support those moonshot projects.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Valeska. I think a key word that you said there for me is value. And at GHD Digital, we strive daily to work with our clients to create that lasting community benefit and value that I think people can grasp onto and say, okay, we understand the direction being taken, we can be part of it, we can invest in it. So creating that platform is a great way forward. Charlie, in listening to that from our other panellists and thinking about the framework that you mentioned, is there something that you're absolutely passionate about within that framework that you really think holds the key for our future success?
Well, I think Christian's brought some energy and enthusiasm to the room, which I think is really important in thinking about this, because the challenge I find talking about missions is you start up here, and then as people start to think about the practicalities of how you might do it, they start to think, well, how would we write the legal contracts that enable that to happen? It gets steadily moved down until you lose the seed of the ambition. And then you lose the power to attract the talented people, which is part of the reason. Then you lose the power to attract the required investment to make it happen, and then you lose the whole momentum of the mission. So I think, coming back to some of the comments, defining it really powerfully up front is important, but then having a framework that says we're not going to think about all the things that could go wrong, we're going to think about how we make sure that this goes right, is a big challenge in how you structure it.
Yeah, so it's important that it's, to your point, that it's emotionally engaging. We all pretend humans are logical. It ain't gonna be the reality. We are all partially logical, but mostly emotional. So whatever it is, it needs to be emotionally engaging. Put the man on the moon. This is where it actually came from. And you need something similar, which is Australian, and which is associated with Australia. It's like nation building, something where people are able to talk about when they barbecue. I hope you all barbecue, do you? Good that I finally arrived in a spot where you can barbecue. See, this is emotionally engaging. You are having fun, and this is part of it. It cannot only be logical, it needs to be emotional. And this is why you get these little tidbits of entertainment here, and this is what you need for the moonshots as well.
I think there's also often so much of a focus on the ideas, and that's obviously critical, and R&D is so important. We need to be doing more in that space. But ideas are absolutely useless if you can't actually productise and commercialise them. So we can have these wonderful moonshot ideas, but I think there also has to be some lens or focus from the beginning about how we actually do take a global view on these things and how we can commercialise them in the longer term.
Absolutely. So love the thoughts there. I think it's only fair to the room that we do take the opportunity to see if we can advance the thinking beyond software as to what other areas should be focused on. I think the room would love to hear where you think those moonshots might land. For mine personally, for what it's worth, I like the idea of education being a real area for Australia to springboard on. We've done tremendously well globally in that regard. but is there potential for further disruption in that sector that Australia could be world leading in? Valeska, have you got a thought on where an area might be for us to focus?
Look, I think it kind of makes sense to play to our strengths, right? So we've got verticals like agriculture and closing the intergenerational gap and mining, where we actually already have really vibrant ecosystems, both in the sort of historic industries, but also the software and the way they're all sort of playing together now. When you think about where we're located or how far away we're located geographically and what that then means to get things overseas if we are going to scale, if we're going to, you know, the best way for us to deal with that challenge is to be building up the IP and the technology based on that really rich and deep historic understanding of those particular industries. I think for us, playing to those strengths is a real opportunity.
Sorry, I'd actually follow yours, Colin, and really agree on the education front. You know, education is already our third largest export industry. I've been lucky enough to study overseas at a really great US university, and I think our institutions really punch above their weight. It's actually good when you can get overseas and you realise, pound for pound, Australians and Australian institutions are very, very good. We are absolutely competitive. We're just small. We just need scale. We need other markets to get to scale. But I really agree on education. SEEK's invested a lot in education. We're known for our job sites, but some of our most successful ventures have been in education in partnership with the university sector. We co-owned IDP Education for 9 years, where we owned 50% and the university sector as a whole owned 50%. When we first invested with the university sector in 2006, that business was worth $70 million and going broke. It's now got a market cap of $1.5 billion and is a really great success story. We've had a similar joint venture with Swinburne University, and we're now invested in universities in Brazil, in Mexico, and we've got a few others on track as well. So education should be an area, and is an area, that Australia is great at, and we just need to have the confidence to keep pushing it.
Fantastic. Charlie?
Education is a great one. We actually, in our 2030 plan, put forward 3 ideas. One of them we put forward and said you should get on and do this, which was around using genomics and personalised medicine to make Australia the healthiest country on earth. And the government, in last year's budget, in fact last week, they recommitted $500 million to making that happen. And there is a group of experts who are working on planning that right now. So that's one that we think is very exciting and offers big opportunities. We had 2 others. One was around creating a hydrogen-based economy, which we kind of was in the early stages of the development when we produced our report. It has taken off like wildfire, to be honest, partly because some of our major trading partners for things like LNG are saying they need to move to hydrogen over a multi-decade kind of period. But Japan has said, we want this much hydrogen at this price in 2030. Can you do it? They put that challenge out to the world. And as a country with more sunlight and wind than we know what to do with, the opportunity to produce clean hydrogen is huge. So the Chief Scientist is leading a strategy development around a hydrogen economy opportunity this year. And then the third that we recommended was saving the Great Barrier Reef. Coming back to Christian's thing about something that's iconically Australian. Obviously that got a bit political last year, but we still see a big opportunity. There are technologies, there are other things that are going to be required to save the Great Barrier Reef. So we think that's a good candidate as well.
Thanks, Charlie. I picked up in your earlier keynote that part of the ISA framework to be able to allow for us to move forward as a nation is very much around the culture, and it's about people. You said it's not about technology, it's about people. What are people doing within their businesses on the panel to really drive that culture? I might start, Christian, with you around how do you get everyone's mindset to be a digital mindset at Telstra, to be able to think in a different way like you expressed earlier?
Yeah, so great question. How do you actually take people on the journey? One, if you actually want to build something new, you need to realize that it actually goes through 3 phases. One is value identification. This is what people will actually buy. Finally, somebody needs to pay for it and they need to love it. Then there's value alignment, which is aligning the organization behind what this stuff is, what people would be willing to pay for. And the third step is value realization. This is when the whole thing happens, and then hopefully your investments pay back. So the most critical part is this value alignment part. And again, if you think about that, humans are 20% logical, 80% emotional. Telling people what to do, unfortunately, doesn't work. If you tell, and I can explain you why. If I tell somebody to do something which this person has never done before, cortisol goes up, anxiety goes up, fight and flight syndrome kicks in, the logical brain gets turned off, people go out of this meeting to the next coffee shop, have a coffee to get some positive response. So, see? Yeah, here you go. So you need to do it in a different way that they actually love it. And part of that, in my experience, is self-discovery. So you need to specifically construe an environment where people get exposed to data, need to think about it, what it could mean, how it actually could be translated into something actionable. And then this discovery process leads to that they get a dopamine kicker. And the dopamine kicker is what we get when we laugh, when we drink a good coffee, stuff like that. So this is really key. See, you are laughing again. You get a dopamine kicker. And I admit it's actually constructed. I do this actively. And so you need to do exactly this in your organizations. Provide people positive feedback, keep the stress level low, then people will go with you on the journey. And slow is fast. Or how would you phrase this if you want to, smooth swimming is fast, somebody said. That would be my 5 cents.
Thank you, Christian.
Yep.
Michael?
Yeah, we've thought a lot about how do we build our culture to keep the innovation turning and pulling out from, be it software specific. We've tried to focus on 4 really big things which we think apply across most organisations. And number 1 comes to meaning, to having a really, really clear vision or purpose for innovation and going to storytelling and how important the narrative and the story and the why is. And then what do you need to build to enable that innovation is firstly, you have to have a genuine willingness to invest, because all you're going to have is a problem. There's no solution, you can't do an ROI. So you have to have a willingness to invest without a business case. And then in order to have a willingness to invest without a business case, you have to have a really supportive ownership structure. That's your board or your shareholders. You have to tell your narrative, not just internally, but you've got to tell it to your board and to your shareholders so they come with you, because you need years of runway. And then finally, what a lot gets skipped over is you've got to align incentives internally. So you've got to have executive and senior management remuneration that doesn't have a huge, big, 1-year short-term incentive, cash-based, based on this year's EBITDAs or this year's numbers. Because if it is, you can do those first 3 steps, and then as soon as they're under pressure, that innovation budget's going to get whacked, because you can cut that out, and it's going to allow you to hit this year's number, get paid, get your bonus, and it doesn't hurt for a few years. So those sort of 4 elements we view as really, really essential. They're not enough, but they're absolutely necessary. And as soon as any one of them drops out, your innovation agenda in any organisation is going to be very, very challenging.
It's very much a part of what Google X have done with their Moonshots factory. I was listening to the captain of Moonshots talking about their incentive program the other day. They are very much incentivised on failure. And so far they've earned a lot of bonuses that haven't really commercialised anything. But it's the right culture to allow for that. How about at Alan? So you're saying you've had to put in place a framework around incentives, or is there another way of being able to get people to think?
That's absolutely one way. In fact, we've recently overhauled our sort of incentive program, and innovation is a really key part of that. I guess we look at it in a few different ways. There's innovations that we can undertake internally within the business to be more efficient and do what we do better. There are innovations that can help us or help our clients engage with us better. And then there are innovations where we can help our clients achieve their goals. And sometimes they overlap as well. I think there are a number of different ways that we've done this. One is actually from the recruitment stage, that is a real focus. So when we are trying to sell ourselves to potential, and we're a people business, obviously, so that is our most important, our people are our most important asset. But we want people who are excited by an organisation that is doing those things. But then that follows through, and I think the mark of an organisation or a culture that really supports innovation is where you have people from across the business, so in every group, not just the people in the teams that are sort of typically considered to be core to that business, and also at every sort of level of the hierarchy, feeling as though they can come forward and make suggestions, and then there's a process that's not too sort of formal, but for allowing those to then be tested. And of course you need to have a ripcord if things aren't working or panning out, but having people feel very comfortable and free to come forward and raise those possibilities, I think is really important and a good mark.
Fantastic. Thank you, Valeska. Charles, just coming back to the report and what ISA have looked at for innovative culture, was there actually an underlying ethos to what that culture has to have in it to be a success?
So I think that there's no single right innovation culture. I mean, I think CEDA are a fantastically successful business, and clearly that culture is working well. Allens will have to develop a slightly different culture depending on what works in their field. The one observation I would make, I guess from my experience, is that the thing that characterises almost all of the highly innovative organisations is high levels of trust. Because I said innovation is very much a personal process. It involves a lot of failure, as you said. If you don't trust the people you are on this journey with, at the first sign of failure, they'll run away from you. You will not feel empowered to take the kind of risks you need to take and make that happen. So, the differences vary from firm to firm, but the thing that I think is the common thread through all of them is high trust.
I've seen some really interesting juxtaposition between how trust develops in areas like Silicon Valley, where I was over there a couple of months ago, and leaders from major organisations, again the Apples, the Facebooks, etc., and their charismatic leadership approach to be able to define the culture. And again, the juxtaposition that we have in Australia, where we did actually have a Minister for Innovation between 1928 and 2017, with the last being Arthur Sinoditis. We've since dropped that portfolio. What part does leadership play in having the right leaders, whether that be from an organisational or a government perspective, make in terms of getting the right culture in play? Open question.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say from the experience, I spent 15 years at the University of Melbourne working at the Business University Interface, working with entrepreneurs and so on. And then I came into government a couple of years ago, and I've been amazed at the extent to which we in Australia look to government to drive innovation, look to government for leadership in innovation. And it's not something you see in Silicon Valley, and most of the people I speak to in Silicon Valley wish the government would get out of their way, even whilst the government is busily giving them support and help in all sorts of useful ways, as I mentioned with Elon Musk. But I think I would like to see a much stronger sense of, if you like, distributed leadership across the Australian economy. Corporate leaders, leaders from the not-for-profit sector stepping up and taking a lead and encouraging government to go with them. But all too often, I think, particularly in innovation, we say, innovation, that's a government thing. We'll wait for the government to take the first step. I'm not sure that that's going to be right for us.
Yeah, I really agree that it amazes me with Australia how much we look at government and rather than looking at ourselves. So I 100% agree. What I've found interesting, though, in talking about trust is just how much of a crisis of trust there is, particularly in the US with the tech firms, how strong that is. I've just gotten back from a few weeks in the US and Latin America, and they face massive issues because they haven't walked the talk. That you've had these charismatic leaders saying X, but their business is delivering Y, and the willingness to internalise the benefits and externalise the negativity and the lack of ownership. I was staggered at a major conference. Every time the word Facebook was mentioned, there was literally booing. Like there was actual booing in the crowd, which was incredible and shows how easily that trust can be eroded if you're not ensuring your organisation is absolutely living the values that you espouse, and I found it quite stark and really confronting at how quickly that seems to have turned.
Christian, did you have a view on that?
Yeah, I'm actually an Americanized European, and I can actually comment on what's happening in the Silicon Valley. I'm faculty member at Singularity University, which is in California, and what's actually happening there, it's a search for value. Yeah, in this sense, it really starts with figuring out what I said early on, what customers would buy. And customers can be individuals, can be organizations, and everybody's just trying to find out what people would buy. And and it's okay to fail, which as an Americanized European, I can tell you is totally out of bounds in Europe. If you fail, then it's a disaster. It's nearly impossible to recover your career in any shape or form. Versus in the US, failure is actually accepted. Nobody actually believes it's great, but it's at least accepted. So I think what my learning from this is find out what customers want to buy. It's important to go out and talk to customers and find out. And I can tell you from my own experience, it works. In the year 2000, I went on the street with the sales team of the company I worked for at that time, and we invented the cloud in Europe in the year 2000. And this was not by genius or Steve Jobs inventing it. Steve Jobs were actually against the iPhone, frankly. And it's about going out, finding out what people value. Be really customer-centric. That's actually the magic.
Thank you for bringing it back to customer value and experience and being about the people, absolutely. I think on that note we should throw it to the people. I'm sure there are a number of people that do have a question for our panel. So if you'd like to raise your hand, and as I mentioned earlier, just state your name and organisation that you're from if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi, Daniel Collins, Awesome Tech. What's the role for small business in moonshots?
I can have a go. I mean, I think the experience of overseas is that for small businesses are often the locus of the really breakthrough innovation. So oftentimes the agility of small business actually enables you to break through in a large problem. So I think the challenge for those who would drive a moonshot or lead a moonshot is to ensure you've got a platform which enables small businesses to engage. Traditionally, I think, again, you've got to actually run towards the risk rather than running away from the risk. And all too often, when you're leading a large project, you say, oh my God, I don't want to take too much risk, so I'll go with a large firm which appears to have lower risk. But that will have often lower innovation capability. So it's about trying to find that mix. But what we see, particularly in the US program called the SBIR program, has been very, very significant in helping to get small businesses woven into some big technology challenges at government level.
Yeah, this is actually true in large corporate as well. You find that small teams with very little resources get way more done than these huge teams. So yes, being a small business, you're actually the focal point of the future.
I think what we've found over the past 5 years, even 2 years, is that there's been a big shift in the way that corporates and governments have actually been engaging with small businesses and startups. It used to be really difficult to make that happen in the sort of time frame and with the risk appetite that you actually need to reap the benefits of it. And there was a lot of talk a couple of years ago about getting kind of startup ready, which sounds a bit trite, but actually I think we have seen a real shift, and it would be great to continue to see that.
I think just the two things, that one for companies, if you're not seed investing small companies yourself and putting 2 or 3 people with a limited budget and setting them out and say, here's your problem, we're kind of going to check in every 3 or 6 months. If you're not doing that on a regular cycle, then you are sort of falling behind because there are so many organisations doing that. And then from a government setting, I think one of the few things that they can do to help is really look at those rules and those laws, how easy it is to start a business, what are the consequences of failure around bankruptcy and all these other things. So reducing the friction in starting up, friction if you do fail, that there's not these massive consequences, and some of the unfair contracting laws that I think are actually quite positive for enabling the small business ecosystem.
I think if we bring it back to earlier comments from Dr. Day in his keynote around the need for collaboration, we're going to need everyone to be playing the game. So small business, large enterprise, academia, how can we get our schools involved? It's got to be something that the nation gets behind. So yes, there's room for small business. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the ice has been broken on the questions from the floor, so I'm sure that will lead to many more to come, and we do have time for a few more today. Just waiting for the mic over here.
Hi, I'm Ashley Brinson at the Warren Center. If I set aside universities as a not-for-profit sector, the question I want to pose is to Charlie. Where does the leadership from the not-for-profit sector come for innovation? And except setting aside also CEDA, where are those not-for-profit leaders?
You'd be a great one. No, so I don't know that you have to be prescriptive about where it comes from. There are a lot of civil society organisations that are, institutionally capable of leading on particular issues. And I don't think that, coming back to what Christian said about focusing on the customer, it's not necessarily true that a mission needs to be led, if you like, by someone who's, if you like, at the ideation stage of the chain, can be led by someone who really sees, or an organisation that sees the problem that needs to be solved and recruits the resources in to make it happen. And so, there's any number of not-for-profit organisations in civil society that could take a leadership role in this and help assemble the resources required.
Thank you. We have a question up the back.
Thanks, guys. Natasha Gelzo from the Australian Financial Review. I have 3 questions for the panel. Who inspires you in the innovation space? Could be a sitting MP, could be a 16-year-old girl, and why? Secondly, what's your vision for Australia? And thirdly, how do you get an electorate on board who might be scared of things like job losses, automation, AI, behind the vision of innovation? So those are my 3 questions for the panel.
There's a challenge for you. You might be able to roll it up into one by expressing what an individual is doing right now that you find interesting.
Actually, the teenagers inspire me. They somehow have ingested all what's here now, and they have ingested what's going to happen in the future. I'll never forget when my 3-year-old couldn't believe that the cordless phone didn't have a built-in camera so that he could show his toys to his grandma. And it was just normal for them. So I think we can actually learn a lot from these kids. And see how they actually envision the future is going to be like. And what we believe is difficult, they believe is, of course, it's going to happen.
I just answer quickly. There are some wonderful not-for-profit leaders who inspire me. There's a young lady in Melbourne named Lauren whose brother went missing 5 years ago, and she just created her own missing persons advocacy network from scratch. She didn't know anything about technology, she didn't know anything about it, but because it touched her personally, she got on, and unfortunately it was a bad outcome for her situation, but she still runs this organisation on a smell of an oily rag. She's taught herself marketing, she's taught herself fundraising, she's taught herself technology. If that's not inspiring, then I don't know what is, and we can all pull that you can always do something, you can always do a bit more, you can always find it. So when you sort of pull up and you sort of what's the vision for Australia is how do we create a society that really celebrates that sort of entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, not necessarily in making $1 billion and being the next, Michael Cannon-Brookes. It's how do we celebrate people who are getting on and doing something. So how do we harness? We've got a wonderful multicultural society with people who work hard. How do we really celebrate and inspire that? And if we do that, I think the innovation flows. If we do that, we have a productive society. And the AI question's really hard because there are big changes coming. The positive is it's going to to make us a wonderfully more productive society. The downside is it's going to create relocation, and it's going to be challenging from a skills perspective. And I think the challenges that we all face in this room is we're going to benefit from that productivity release. That's going to be great for shareholders, it's going to be great for companies. Are we willing to take some of that productivity gains and reinvest it in the people who are negatively affected, rather than just leaving it to government, leaving it to other organisations to train them? I think we've got to reinvest in the people who are dislocated, and we have to take responsibility for that, because it's going to be our organisations that benefit from it.
My job gives me the privilege of travelling around the country meeting with innovators far and wide, and it would be completely invidious for me to pick out any one. I reckon they're all fantastic. I'm hugely optimistic about the future of Australian innovation because I speak to these people, I see what they're doing, young and old, male, female, from north, south, east and west. So I think, you know, the Australian innovator, if you like, is who inspires me, and they take many forms. My future vision for Australia is pretty simple. So I've got two kids, they're 12 and 8, and I want them to grow up and be able to have the coolest jobs in the world without leaving Australia. I want them to leave home, don't be wrong, but I don't want them to have to leave Australia. I left Australia to do my PhD, and I was immersed in a startup ecosystem over in the UK. And I remember at that time, as a young 20-something, I didn't really understand what it meant to be in a startup ecosystem, but I'm very optimistic and have this vision that my kids will grow up in one of the most vibrant ecosystems in the world, and as I say, have the coolest jobs without leaving Australia. How do we get people excited about it? I think we've heard it before. It's storytelling. It's giving people a reason to support it, to engage in it. Yes, there's going to be dislocation. Yes, there's going to be challenges along the way. But as you read the articles in places like The Economist, The New York Times, Australia's actually done a pretty good job of navigating some choppy economic waters over the last 30 years. I'd back us to do that again into the future, but only if we grasp the opportunity rather than running away from it.
So I'm just going to close with bringing back to opening remarks about where we sit on the global stage and what that presents to us as a future challenge. When you look at China having a new economy that's 4 times larger than the Australian economy, not their entire economy, just the new economy that's focused on where innovation can take them, then there's huge progress required in Australia to be able to get us to a globally relevant level. But being 20 in the world, you know, we're heading in the right direction. Fantastic to see. Part of the challenge that we'll have to face to be able to play our part on the global stage, which we've always done incredibly well, is to be able to manage the difference between what emerging companies are looking to undertake versus what that means to disrupt our existing workforce. So the future of work is definitely going to change for us. It's going to disrupt a lot of industries that have been around for 100 years or more in Australia. How do we get that balance right? And what investment in particular from a business sense, and I'll ask our business leaders on the panel, are you making to get that balance right between what the future of work might hold and how to preserve the value already being created for your clients? And I'll start with Valeska, if I may.
Yeah, it's such a difficult issue to grapple with. I think the first thing is not resisting those things that might ultimately cut away at parts of our roles. And that means that we try and bring it into the business as soon as possible and see how it can augment what we already do. And then keep trying to improve on top of that. I also think there's so much focus on STEM at a school level and a tertiary level, but we need to really be focusing on reskilling people in their 30s and 40s and 50s in a way that's going to be sustainable for them and for businesses and our society more broadly.
Yeah, great, thank you. Christian, if you could review what Telstra are doing?
Telstra connects us all, and this will become even more important in the future. Yeah, augmented reality will be everywhere, and you can be in the outback while at the same time sit in the office here in Sydney. So I think that's pretty much Telstra's role in the future, and we'll continue to build this nation jointly with all of you. One more comment, maybe unrelated to Telstra and more general. I think it will be key that learning continues. Everybody will need to continue to learn. And the days that you went to university and you were done, they are long over. So I think that's along your lines, Michael, an opportunity for Australia to export and grow education. Even more of that in the future.
Look, the future of work's a big topic. I'm an optimist because you've seen all of these major waves of technology changes have dramatically benefited society on a whole, on a macro level. I think the challenge that we have with this wave of innovation around automation and AI and ML and DL is just the rate of change is faster than previous, so we've got less time to adjust, which means those people who are negatively affected, to Christian's point, and to Valeska's point, is they're going to need more help. It's a much faster adjustment cycle. And so we have to find a way to help those people. And picking emerging industries, I think, is impossible because every industry is being impacted by this. I mean, you just look at the massive technology advances in mining, and their use of automation and their use of literal machine learning is staggering. But that's dislocated a lot of jobs already. It's not a wave that's coming, it's a wave that's already happening, and it's just speeding up. So the challenge for us is embrace the positives, don't ignore it, but we have to find a way to rapidly re-educate, re-skill, and not ignore those people who are going to be negatively impacted.
And I'm actually less concerned about the negative impact. And there's one data point which indicates it actually might not be as some people are concerned. I've seen interesting statistics which shows the average employment in the UK since 1860 till today. And it's always 47 plus minus 2%. You don't see the Second World War, you don't see any recession, it's always the same. And interestingly, in 1860, the UK had 15 million inhabitants. Now the UK has 60 million inhabitants. So what this statistic says that at least historically, a country goes through industry revolutions, population growth, and the employment rate is the same. And effectively in the UK, since 1860, about 30 million new jobs got created.
Thank you. And just yes or no, Charlie, does the framework being developed by the department address the future of work?
It might be a bit too much to ask it to address the future of work because I think we've said
CEDA might be a bit
it's a significant topic. But I think it does offer us a real opportunity to race forward into the future with optimism and confidence, because I do think the opportunities are there. And that's another topic that the government is thinking hard about in the future of work, but there are opportunities for sure.